Hello and welcome back to another video here with me, Meoni, and this time around we're doing something a little bit different. We're just going to chill and I'm just going to put some random footage in the background from 14 and I'm going to talk about some things because it's not very often I actually get to address my audience directly because obviously I can't stream. My current bandwidth is less than 1 up, so obviously live streaming is out of the question, and until I get enough funds together and my savings go higher, I won't be able to afford to move to a place that has better internet. We live out here in the countryside, there's not really a lot happening. So yeah, as you can tell, I'm missing out on quite a bit of interaction with a lot of people that really do deserve to have interaction with me. And obviously people through Patreon, they have access to Discord, but it's not really the same, is it? I can't live stream, so I can't directly return feedback from things that people say, and often it's really hard for people to sort of get across what my opinions on certain things actually are. So today we're just going to sit here and we're going to talk for a little bit. So first of all, what did I think about Shadowbringers? This is a question that's cropped up quite a bit, but honestly I didn't really want to give an answer until we'd finished at least the first boss of Savage, and indeed, progressed a little bit into it. It's been 1 month since Shadowbringers came out, so I think it's sort of the prime time to talk about this. And firstly, I'd like to say that the story writing in particular this time around was absolutely exceptional. I was gripped from start to finish ever since we walked into the Crystarium, and then at the end where we walked out of the Crystarium. It was absolutely fantastic, and without really spoiling anything, this isn't something I really want to go into too much detail about. I'm not here to spoil the storyline. It was to the point where I thought that Heavensward paled in comparison to this storyline, and that's saying something because I'm the sort of person that really enjoyed Heavensward. The storyline back then was very well written, and if you were to compare this expansion to something more recent like Stormblood, I think they knocked it out of the park. And where Stormblood felt a little bit like we were doing separate arc storylines like in an anime where it would veer off for an entire season and then eventually come back, it feels like this entire journey has been one walk around the subject, and finally we're back to that main storyline progression where it should be, and we're getting some serious answers. Again, without going into too many spoiler ramifications, I really enjoyed the protagonists that were included in this, and certainly the bad guy, because well, he was completely lovable, and I don't think there's anyone on the planet that hated him after all this was over. And you can judge by the fan art and all of the various other posts on the forums and other places on Reddit and all the pictures of how much people really respected that character. Anyway, so let's move past that before I do accidentally spoil something for somebody who is watching that hasn't actually played through it yet. It's exceptional and some of the best writing we've seen in an MMO so far. So what other things did Shadowbringers bring that I perhaps wasn't necessarily that overjoyed with? And that, I'm afraid, has to be the role quests. Splitting it down to just 4 roles is interesting and sounds great on paper, but the lack of interaction with some of those quests felt a bit jarring. Some of them were well written and some of them were not so much. It felt like they'd homogenized things a little bit too much in my opinion, and I would have preferred to have separate, class quest lines like we used to have. Now that's not to say at level 80, of course, there is that final quest that you get for your job, but until then you just have those role quests. And I liked them for the most part, the main storyline of them, the main, reason we're actually doing those quests. But for the most part, I think it just sort of wasn't really completely there, in my opinion. It told some interesting storyline, but it wasn't really as compelling as perhaps I had hoped. That was the only sort of real letdown by story writing this time around for me personally. A lot of people will say, well, that's complete garbage, Meoni, I love the storylines, and you're wrong, which is completely fine. We're all entitled to our opinions. That's what makes the world go round. I just feel that by limiting it to only role quests, they missed out on a lot of potential story writing, especially considering the rich, open, deep world that we were immersed in with the First and indeed Novrant. People have always been fascinated with the size of an expansion, how big this is, how much of a game this adds to the actual game experience itself, and that sort of brings me nicely nicely into a segue about the actual zones. What did I really think about the 6 zones in Shadowbringers? Well, without mentioning the 6th one, because again, spoiler reasons, I do think that the 5 zones before the 6th were absolutely incredible. When I got to Raktika, I think it hit me the most. I think that forest was just absolutely captivating. The storyline had me hooked at that point. I wasn't entirely taken by Ilmeg at the start. Halfway through it, I was really enjoying the pixies. At the start, I didn't so much. But I don't know, I kind of liked the fantasy elements of that swiftly transitioned into a much more real, sort of dirty, sort of tribal situation that we had in Raktika. And then the second part of Raktika, when we met up with the Viera, or in this case the Vis, I was incredibly invested. I loved all of the side quests. I did all of the side quests actually in this expansion, which is actually something I didn't do for Stormblood, which might surprise some people out there considering how much I'm invested in the lore of this game. So yeah, it was interesting. It was interesting to see how the zones sort of joined together, and the little bit of dialogue, the narration when you first enter a zone was an absolutely beautiful touch, and I really hope they bring that back for subsequent expansions and patches and stuff if ever other zones are added. I love the idea of Ardbert actually narrating the introduction to that, and I really think it added something that the other expansions to this game didn't have. We had a reason to go to each of the zones, the storyline was driven to them, and it wasn't split apart by separate agendas, which is something that made Shadowbringers a much more whole, complete package rather than Stormblood in my opinion. So let's talk about Savage quickly. So the only Savage instance I've cleared so far is the first boss, which is Eden Prime, and that has to be one of the most enjoyable fights I've had in a very long time. If we were to compare the entry to the first raid in Stormblood, the type of mechanics they are dealing with, the timing on them, the learning threshold is much higher I think than the entry to Stormblood's raids, and I think as a whole it's really benefited from it. It's quite a fun fight. It's by no means is it a difficult fight. I mean, there's a kill video on the channel if you want to go check that out, and I'm working on a guide. It's not that difficult, there's just a few elements that have to be communicated, which is why a lot of pugs are having trouble in Eden Savage, but for the most part with a static it's fairly straightforward. I mean, we spent a good 8 hours as our progression team. I mean, we're casuals basically when it comes to raiding in this new static I'm in. I decided to go the casual route and have a sort of relaxed time at it. We did 3 days of raiding, we did 8 hours, and we managed to kill it by the end of the week. And yeah, it was a very fun fight, and I'm really looking forward to farming that and working on the second boss, which hopefully we'll get down the following week. That's sort of our aim. Every 1 to 2 weeks a boss dies. That's sort of where we are with our casual status. So far the mechanics are fun, the fights are entertaining, and I cannot wait to get to the 3rd and 4th one, and if you've not seen that I'm not going to spoil it for you because they're absolutely epic looking. So let's quickly talk about job balance. This is something else I've gotten written down as a note to sort of talk about roughly. White Mage feels amazing. I main a White Mage if you didn't already know. This was always my main character, my main job if you like. I love healers in games. Astrologian was complete garbage before the recent 5.0 patch, in my opinion at least. Scholar is fun, but it's not my cup of tea. I like that raw damage and raw healing from the White Mage, and a lot of the abilities feel great. Basically, I'm just fueling my blood lilies and I'm spamming misery as much as possible, and I'm enjoying keeping the uptime of my DPS where possible. Even though last time we was in Eden Savage, I think my final pass on that kill was something like 12k HPS, because there was that much to go out and heal. But, you know, I've got to be more confident with my abilities. I've got to learn to actually heal less and rely on the other healer and rely on cooldowns. There was a little bit of overhealing, which is obviously not great, but it was perfectly reasonable to be a little bit safer than sorry for our first clear. In general, the only other stuff I've played is Red Mage and Dancer. They're both 80 as well. Red Mage feels fun. It's just basically the same as it ever was before, a few minor adjustments. Yeah, it's fun, it does the job, it's fairly easy, and I can pick up and play it when I need to. And Dancer is absolutely fantastic. I love the raid-wide buffs, dance partner buffs, I love everything to do with that, and the rotation is fun with the flourish procs and sort of like the RNG based in that. the Simon Says style gameplay or fear-driven. It's absolutely exceptional, and I think they've really added to the game in a big way by adding that physical range DPS. I was unsure about Dancer being put into 14, considering, you know, it wasn't really a full-on healer in Final Fantasy XI, but a lot of people were under the impression that we might see it as a healer. I was a little bit bummed early on that we didn't get it as a healer, but now I'm perfectly happy to say I'm very satisfied with it being a ranged physical, and it is an absolute joy to play. And if you've not played it yet, I would highly recommend it. So, in regards to class changes and things, we can't really see much of that changing, but there is a live letter, number 53, this Wednesday, August the 7th at 4 AM PDT, which is 11 AM GMT. I'll be on there for that, recording and making a bite-sized breakdown of everything there. What have we got to look forward to in that live letter? Well, there's supposedly a lengthy Q&A session, which you can actually submit questions to. I'll link that in the description at the top. Go over there and submit your own questions for Yoshi P and the team to answer. They're all about Shadowbringers this time around and people who are sharing their experiences, so it'll be interesting to see what they thought about their launch. So in other words, they're going to be sort of recapping the launch of Shadowbringers, and really the only new stuff that we're going to see is probably some discussions for 5.1, considering 5.1 is absolutely loaded with content. There's supposed to be PvP updates, there's supposed to be the Alliance raid, all sorts of things. I'm really looking forward to seeing anything to do with Nier Automata and, you know, Dark Apocalypse in general. That's going to be really fun to hear of, and hopefully we have some discussion about restoration of Ishgard and indeed the potential housing discussions if they plan to implement that and how they implement that. So that's going to be really interesting. So make sure not to miss that if you want to watch it live again on Wednesday, August 7th at 4 AM PDT or 11 AM GMT. And of course, if you do miss it, I will recap it in a bite-sized format in that afternoon, the day it goes out. In general, my weeks have been collecting minions and making videos, as you've seen probably on the channel. I've been enjoying my trusts, I've been leveling my Dancer. I'm amazed at how good it is at 80. I've been enjoying fate grinding. We finally completed the fate completion stuff for the bicolor gemstones. I'm just begging them to add more rewards to that in the future, because doing the open world fates was quite fun for me, seeing all of them sort of chained together, all of the storylines for that hidden in the fate descriptions. It was just mindless fun, and I really enjoyed Eureka, so I'm the sort of person that enjoys a grind, so that was right up my alley. In general, I've just been enjoying Shadowbringers way more than I did with Stormblood, and that's not an exaggeration. I really feel that I'm more invested this time around with everything that I've done. There's not really anything that I've chosen to not take part in. Everything that's on those patch notes I have at least tried to do or in the process of doing. So yeah, I'm looking forward to doing some treasure map dungeons. I haven't done any of those yet. Unfortunately, we weren't able to do any this weekend. My friend wasn't around, so hopefully we get some Dungeons of Lai Gaia treasure map footage this week. Either way, thank you all kindly for watching and indeed listening to me ramble for a bit for what is probably over 15 minutes by now. This is not the usual format, but I just thought I'd share my opinion, see what people thought about things, and which ultimately has to be one of the best MMO launches for an expansion in the history of existence. Either way, thank you kindly for watching. Let me know what you think about any of the topics covered today in the comments below, and I'll speak to you all next time.